The Richardson complex is a tremendous opportunity for our community. It has terrific architecture from the 19th century that just towers over this whole part of town. And combined with this amazing landscape we're respectfully reusing.
It's safe to say that these buildings were the first great manifestation of Richardson's genius as an architect. The buildings are classified as a National Historic Landmark, which is the highest designation the Department of Interior gives to cultural resources. And in terms of architectural history, H.H. Richardson would become the most famous architect in America by the time of his death in 1886. And in fact, it was the largest building of his career. This building was laid out according to Thomas Kirkbride. The Kirkbride system involved wards on either side of the central administration building, arranged in a kind of echelon system, each connected by a curved corridor. And if you look at it in plan, it's often been described as a flight of birds. Kirkbride was one of the pioneers of the moral treatment, and by that they meant that the environment in which a person was in could have a great effect on his cure. It's a huge complex. The grounds themselves were 200 acres. The buildings had at least 500,000 square feet, and it was nearly half a mile long from one end to the other.
Richardson was only in his early 30s when he received this commission. The building was not particularly technologically advanced, so the kinds of construction and the design problems in terms of how to make a building were things with which he was familiar. He drew upon the Second Empire and Victorian Gothic modes, but in this work we see the transition to his use of Romanesque forms and motifs and the beginning steps towards the creation of the Richardsonian Romanesque. The plan was not entirely his. It derived from work of Thomas Kirkbride, and he also had the advice of Frederick Law Olmsted in dealing with the site and the landscape development.
Olmsted and Vaux were famous because of their design for Central Park in 1858 and Prospect Park a few years later, and they were beginning to plan parks in almost every important city in the United States. It was Olmsted and Vaux who suggested that the entire complex be oriented toward the southeast so that the buildings would get as much daylight as possible, especially during the winter months.
To the north, there was an agrarian landscape, very actively farmed by the patients in the hospital, and it was eventually carved off and used as the campus for Buffalo State College. Olmsted and Vaux were able to borrow, in essence, a very large open space, and the historic Forest Lawn Cemetery, which predates the Olmsted-Vaux park system, combined with the very large pastoral landscape of the park with this new psychiatric therapeutic landscape, they basically created an enormous open space on the north side of Buffalo. And it really creates a city that Olmsted once described as the best planned city in America, if not the world.
Till the middle of the 20th century, the perception of members of the community and professionals treating individuals with mental illness was that essentially mental illness was a life sentence. With the advent of modern medications, with the move toward moving services to the community, individuals no longer needed, nor were they perceived to need, long-term care in institutional settings. By the mid-1970s, there were only 650 beds serving the community. As a consequence, the beds across the country and at Buffalo Psychiatric Center essentially became surplus beds, buildings became surplus, and in the mid-1970s, the New York State decommissioned the Richardson Center complex.
I always appreciated architecture, and I was sort of a fan of Frank Lloyd Wright. So when I came here and looked at what's outstanding about Buffalo, I immediately recognized the magnificent old buildings. I recognized that the Asylum building had been refurbished and captured. We had just done the Martin House, And the third jewel in the crown was the Richardson building, which was capped by the fact that the grounds were done by Frederick Law Olmsted. The building itself with its huge two towers is striking. You can see them from everywhere. The interior is going to look beautiful. Right now we've cleaned up and finished the part of the main floor. We've replastered and painted and then refinished the wood. It looks terrific. Governor Pataki had been very helpful, very generous, and he agreed to give us $100 million to do the Richardson, and that's what we're working on now. In creating the Richardson Center, we hope to accomplish a great deal. The job is so overwhelming that anything less than the best leadership wouldn't help.
The first thing we did was bring in a panel of experts from around the country to help us think about the project and get some concepts in mind. And then we did two detailed reports. The first was a historic structures report, and the second was a cultural landscape report. And both of those were really aimed at helping us know more about the building and the landscape, what shape they were in, and what was more or less significant about them from a preservation point of view. Then those two reports really led into a master planning process. We're focusing on the first phase right now, which for the building means the core of the building, the towers building and the wings on either side. And the uses will be a boutique hotel, an architecture center, a conference center, and a visitor center.
I see it as a real dynamic in the community to bring about a reduction in stigma and how we inhabit this land, how we provide services, and how we partner with the community.
We're giving the building and the grounds back to the community. We're really, providing a place for the community to come and enjoy this marvelous architecture and landscape. I also have the personal hope that it will begin to help the community think about mental health and mental illness and begin a process where we can think a little bit more about what happened here and what's happening here and how that affects all of us and how we can sort of incorporate that into our community.
There's an opportunity for a synergy that can really catalyze new development and exciting new things in this part of our community. I believe that it's a stepping stone towards a new economic vitality for our community that reuses existing architecture for modern uses in a way that celebrates our past and paves the way to the future.